When a high-profile conspiracy theorist was targeted by the feds and involved in a shootout in front of his own home, many people came to be fully convinced that his theories must be true. After all, they thought, doesn't the government targeting him lead credence to his claims? Little did they know, the story was much more complicated than that. A whole lot of conspiracy theorists out there will make the claim that the federal government is out to get them and silence them for the claims that they're making online. This is usually nothing more than a bid to make themselves look a little bit more cool while upping their credibility. Every once in a while, one of these guys will end up in some sort of confrontation with the feds, though. This case was, perhaps, one of the most high-profile cases of that sort of thing happening, so let's start at the beginning. Milton William Cooper was born on May 6, 1943. Better known as Bill, not a whole lot was known about his early life. What we do know is that, once he graduated from high school, he went straight into the United States Navy. However, things get a bit gray again when it comes to his experiences within the Navy. He says that he was part of naval intelligence, claiming to have quite a high-level security clearance, but this has been heavily doubted over the years. Public records show that he never went past the rank of petty officer second class in the Navy, but Bill's recollection of events has been quite a bit different. While serving a tour of duty in Vietnam, Bill got himself a couple of service medals. This was when Bill claims that he was able to feast his eyes upon a treasure trove of secret government documents. However, due to reasons unknown, he claims that he lost the memory of what those documents contained for the time being. Bill was discharged from the military in 1957. Afterwards, he simply went on to attend a junior college in California, graduate, and then go on to work for a number of technical and vocational schools. It was in 1988 that Bill would first come to make a name for himself, and it wasn't due to his military service or his work. It was due to his strong belief in aliens and various other different conspiracy theories tied to them. Bill gained a lot of respect and attention within different UFO circles when he made the claim that he had read all of those secret documents while in the military. He said that those documents exposed everything from the existence of UFOs to their connection with the Illuminati. However, when he couldn't describe the documents in detail, he began to tell a new tale. Now he said that he was using hypnosis to recall the documents in much greater detail. When he remembered everything much more clearly, he told his followers that, not only did the government make contact with aliens, but they also made a contract with them to hand over a bunch of humans for slave labor. For that to come to fruition, Bill said, first the Earth would have to come together under a united global government. Bill said that he was going out to California on his motorcycle to tell an interested reporter about his revelations. However, it was during this ride that he would collide with a black limousine. This resulted in a pretty grievous injury. Bill ended up getting his right leg amputated right above the knee. This was possibly the origin of a paranoia that would follow him for the rest of his life. The fear that the feds were following him in these black vehicles, hoping to take him out before he could tell the truth. He, much later down the line, said that two men in black came to visit him while he was in the hospital, asking him if he had learned his lesson. Bill says that he told him he would be, in his words, a good little boy, but held a silent determination to become a badass and spread the truth just that much harder. As Bill tended to embellish his stories to make himself appear more like a hero, it's unknown how much of this part of the story, if any of it, is true. To speak about Bill's connections with the UFO community, I have Matt from the YouTube channel Zeta-files, a channel that talks about a lot of alien conspiracies, to help explain that.
By 1984, Bill was living in Fullerton, California. He had a renewed drive, a boldened sense of motivation to continue telling his story. While working at a small technical college, he decided that he was going to reach out to other men in the same community. One of these men was named Gray Barker. Gray had been publishing a series of UFO books for a while at that time. In his book, he talked about the men in black, the government agents who silence those that talk about UFOs, as well as a lot about Mothman, a cryptid from Point Pleasant, West Virginia. Bill sent him a wad of papers for his newsletter, most of which focused on the paranormal. Bill became an active member of the very early internet. In the summer of 1988, when the internet was still very fresh to the general public, Bill started making posts to what was called the Paranet BBS, which was among the first UFO message boards available online. Here, he began to make even bolder claims than before. He didn't only claim that he had read the secret documents while in the military, but that he had seen a spacecraft himself. He said that he was serving aboard the USS Tiru when he and his fellow servicemen saw a metal spacecraft that he claimed was even larger than an entire football field. He said that the craft would enter and exit the water over and over again. He had an explanation for why he had never told this story before, saying that he had been ordered by his military superiors to never speak of what he had seen. While that story, which Bill called the T-Roo incident, didn't garner him much more fame, it did gain the attention of a fellow ufologist named John Lear. John was also active on Paranet. Being the son of a man who owned the Learjet Company, and a pilot who claimed to have flown missions for the CIA himself, John Lear had quite a reputation within the community. He was the author of a post that gained a lot of attention called The UFO Cover-Up, which was mainly a compilation of a bunch of different stories by other ufologists with his own twist to add some flavor. Funnily enough, some of the elements were those of a man named Paul Benowitz, a fellow member of the community who was later found to have been fed a lot of misinformation by an American counterintelligence agent named Richard C. Doughty. Bill and John met up, spending a lot of time together over the next few years, mainly in the late 80s. John's views began to heavily influence Bill and vice versa. In 1989, the two released what they called the indictment against the US government, although it was more along the lines of a very early internet call-out post. In that indictment, they accused the US government of, in their words, aiding and abetting and concealing this alien nation which exists in our borders. At this time, this was a fairly new viewpoint. While UFO conspiracies had existed for decades at this point, most of those that held them didn't have very deep political positions. Bill and John changed that, spearheading the movement that, while it feared aliens, feared the shadow government that colluded with the aliens much more. Bill continued to give lectures on his own within the booming UFO conspiracy convention circuit. A man who set up a lot of his first gigs, Norio Hayakawa, later spoke of that era of their lives, saying, he brought this whole fresh new viewpoint on UFOs. He connected the UFO phenomenon to the secret government and a plan to create a new world order. In 1984, Bill accused President Dwight D. Eisenhower of negotiating the treaty with aliens, which would allow the aliens to abduct humans from all over the United States to use in their own experiments and for slave labor. Eisenhower had also helped to facilitate relations between the Illuminati and the aliens in order to keep their existence a secret from the general population. Bill said that the aliens had been doing this all throughout history, with different religions, magic, and various aspects of the occult leading back to them. He said that, even in the end, the Illuminati were nothing but the poor, manipulated pawns. Bill decided to make Camp Verda, a smaller town in Arizona, his new home base. From there, he would continue to travel across the entire country, usually giving lectures at different UFO-themed events. He started to make writings of his own that he would sell at the merchandise booth at these conventions. They sold very well, surprising even him, and made the idea of becoming a writer seem like a very viable option moving forward. However, it was during these conventions that Bill would begin to breed quite a bit of controversy. A lot of other prominent members in the community began to accuse him of plagiarism. Many of them said that the supposed top-secret Navy documents that he had detailed were actually directly lifted from their own works that were in no way inspired by actual government paperwork. Some of these stories that Bill claimed to have been true weren't even serious theories. On a few occasions, he was even found to have adopted memes from the community without even knowing into what he called true stories. A man named Don Ector of UFO Magazine actually ran a whole series of exposés on Bill in the early 90s. One of the biggest controversies that made Bill into somewhat of a laughingstock involved what he called the O.H. Krill document. This document had been crafted by two ufologists, one of which was John Lear himself, who chose the title as an inside joke. Bill didn't realize the whole thing was a joke and decided to adapt it for himself, telling an interviewer for a TV show that he had seen the document in the early 70s. John Lear, seeing this, turned completely red in humiliation and took Bill aside. He told him, "Bill, O.H. Krill is a joke. John Grace and I used Krill because of a woman who allegedly channeled an entity named Krill. Grace just pulled the OH out of thin air." Bill disagreed adamantly, saying that he had seen the document in the Navy. John Lear was bewildered, knowing full and well that he had made the whole thing up. John dropped the whole thing, but this began to sour the relationship between the two. It was this, and the fear of the shadow government, that would end the relationship between the two men, with Bill claiming to fear that John was a CIA agent who had been sent to monitor him, maybe even feed him false information and humiliate him. However, it's just as likely that he realized John could call him out on his embellishments too easily, and it just wasn't safe, career-wise, to keep him around.
Other ufologists were able to find that Bill's stories of his time in the Navy were very embellished, if any of them were even true at all. It was found that what Bill did was, according to those who criticized him, nothing beyond low-level clerical work in the Navy. It was nothing that would have given him even close to the security clearance he would have needed to view such top-secret information that should have only been available to only the top elites in the entire world. Still though, none of this killed Bill's career by any means. He decided to take the idea of being a writer in his field much more seriously. In 1991, he published a book that would become his magnum opus. This book was called Behold a Pale Horse. This book was monumental within both the UFO and militia circles all across the United States, with some major news organizations even describing it as the militia movement's manifesto itself. The book itself was somewhat of a compilation of different writings, with less than half of the book actually being Bill's own words. Bill wrote in his book that he knew for a fact that the government had different dossiers on who he called true patriots, people who he said would resist the budding New World Order. He said that the government planned to round up as many of those patriots and dispose of them as they could in a way that would make as little of a fuss in the media as possible. He said that one of those times was none other than the Thanksgiving holiday. That is because, he said, people would be gathered at home, full, and most of all sleepy. Of all the odd claims Bill made, one of them was a warning that he gave to his readers to never be at their own home or at the homes of their family members during a holiday ever again. Bill had crafted a very elaborate conspiracy theory that encompassed a good portion of modern American history. He covered all of the classics, like the Kennedy assassination, but also covered some less walked paths, like warnings of an upcoming ice age or bizarre cult-like rituals of the Illuminati. The conspiracy theory, while not believable to most, was still praised for its complexity. If anything, it did seem very thoroughly thought out. In fact, it was so to such the extent that many people who had previously never been interested in anything conspiracy theory related began to come to believe, at least partially after they had read the book. Mainstream bookstores even started carrying the book, spreading its popularity even further. Many of Bill's claims were even more bold than simply reading government documents or seeing a UFO. At one point, he claimed that he had seen a top-secret video of an interview with the driver of JFK's limousine at the time of his death. It was in this video, he says, that the driver claimed a gas pressure device developed by aliens from the Trilateral Commission had been used to shoot Kennedy from right up there in the driver's seat. Bill theorized that this driver then fired one more shot at Kennedy himself after the initial alien weaponry failed. This theory was so influential that many other conspiracy theorists, even if they didn't believe in the alien weapon, did come to doubt the driver and accuse him of being the true killer, a claim that hadn't really been made before. In the book, Bill popularized a couple of other conspiracy theories that have become much more mainstream, even widely accepted as fact by many members of the population. One of these theories was that of the government inventing AIDS to cut down on the population of not only gay people, but also black and Hispanic people as well. Even South Africa's Minister of Health at the time distributed that chapter of a book as fact when making the same claims, getting himself quite a bit of criticism worldwide. Another conspiracy theory that Bill pushed has since been accepted as more or less fact by a lot of people. That is that of the Bilderberg Group, the Skull of Bones, and the Freemasons being in cahoots with the Illuminati. Given that it's very believable that, if there were a shadow government, that it would be the mega-rich and influential politicians that would be a part of it. The public was, and is, very willing to accept this theory as being, at the very least, feasible. However, while Bill made some claims that many came to accept, he did raise controversy with a few others. One of the documents that he used within his book was from an anti-Semitic text called Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion. It isn't really known why Bill decided to use this text himself in the first place, as he seemed to denounce it. The text details a secret plan by the Jews to take over the world. However, Bill only seemed to like it because it implied the existence of plans to create a one-world government. He said to ignore the word Jew and instead replace it with Illuminati, and Goyim, a term for non-Jews, should be replaced with cattle instead. Still though, the book's publisher began to remove this section from the book after initial printings. Starting in 1992, Bill started hosting a radio show, one that he called The Hour of the Time, straight from his home at the top of a hill in the small town of Eager, Arizona. Bill would usually record his show to a cassette or directly broadcast it over a telephone link to Nashville, where it was then transmitted that much further. Bill would comment live on a lot of ongoing controversies, such as the Waco siege, giving his opinions as to what was really happening behind the scenes. His radio show became very well known and beloved within the militia movement. Even the Oklahoma City bomber Timothy McVeigh was a huge fan. Bill made waves after the Columbine massacre as well. This was when he made a claim that the CIA was using various means, like drugs and hypnosis, to give kids the desire to shoot up their schools. He said that their reasoning for doing this would be to open people up more to the idea of gun control, saying, "This plan is well underway. The middle class is begging the government to do away with the Second Amendment." One of Bill's many early viewers was someone who had proved to be controversial in his own right many years later, that being Alex Jones himself. Alex Jones would call into Bill's show from time to time, or even invite him to his own show to share conspiracies. However, Bill came to despise Alex pretty quickly. Bill had become a bit of an elitist, even a gatekeeper, when it came to conspiracies, and he didn't find Alex's theories to be refined enough for his taste. He said that Alex was simply making up his theories while his own were carefully crafted and well thought out. In 1999, Alex hosted a New Year's Eve broadcast in which he said that the end of the world would be triggered as soon as the millennium hit, something akin to the Y2K theories at the time. Bill said that Alex Jones was completely out of his mind, saying that all he was doing was fear-mongering and sowing the seeds of panic across the entire country. Afterwards, Bill decided to denounce Alex Jones once and for all in a clip that is nothing short of legendary for how unintentionally funny it really is.
I was only on the Alex Jones show one time, when I didn't realize what a liar and a coward and a sensationalist bullshit artist that he is. Alex Jones said he had had me on the air once before, several years ago, and had to cut me off the air because of the foul language that I used. So on the air tonight, I'm going to tell you, Alex Jones, you are a bold-faced, miserable, stinking little coward liar. Now let me say that again so there's no mistake about it. You can all tell Alex Jones that I said this, and I suspect he's listening because he does. Alex Jones, you are a bold-faced, stinking, rotten little coward liar.
One of Bill's biggest claims to fame was the idea that he supposedly predicted 9/11. In June of 2001, about 3 months before the attack, Bill commented on a clip of Osama bin Laden in his compound in Afghanistan, saying that he would soon be blamed for a major attack on a large metropolitan area in the United States. Then, right after 9/11 took place, he said that the US would soon be going to war in either 2 or 3 countries. Afterwards, Bill got big into the 9/11 conspiracies himself, taking a particular interest in the controlled demolition theory, something that had since become a staple belief among many 9/11 conspiracy theorists. With all the fame that Bill was getting talking about these more government-centric conspiracy theories, he had moved away from the topic of aliens quite a bit. His claims got more bold, saying that various presidents of the United States and the IRS itself had been targeting him specifically, although he didn't really have anything to back up those claims. His beef with the IRS resulted from the fact that Bill had refused to pay taxes throughout much of the late 90s. This had earned him a warrant for both tax evasion and bank fraud, a warrant that he successfully dodged for years. However, it was this very arrest warrant and his paranoia about the government in general that would lead to his downfall. The authorities were well aware that Bill was heavily armed, owning a good number of firearms in his home. Not only that, but he had a strong following of armed militiamen as well. They knew that if they did confront him with his arrest warrants, the outcome likely wouldn't be pretty. If they were going to arrest him on his charges, they would have to find some sort of way to do it that would avoid all of the violence. Despite the fact that the U.S. Marshal Service had labeled Bill as a major fugitive, they avoided arresting him for years while they tried to devise a plan. Now living in Eager in his home on top of a hill, Bill had a pretty solid view of whoever was driving down his street and up to his home. Given the mountainous view, a lot of people, mainly young lovers, would drive up the scenic route to stop and get a look. Bill, though, had grown so paranoid that seeing these people stopping on his street only meant one thing to him, that the feds were scoping him out. While it was indeed true that the feds were after him, they were staying behind the scenes. The people he was seeing at the time were nothing but civilians soaking up some nature. Bill began to get a little overzealous when it came to chasing people off of his road. While it was a public road, he often called it his street, waving his gun around and scaring off anyone who would stop their cars. Knowing of his warrants, he became much more and more convinced that these teenagers were actually the feds, trying to find a way to arrest him. Bill had, a few times, taken one of his friends up to see his house. During one of these visits, he brought the man up to the second story of the home, saying that it would be the perfect place to snipe the feds from. In March of 2001, Bill wrote an email to his friend, stating, "I will defend myself when they come and try to kill as many as I can before they kill me. You can all count on me to set an example for future confrontations with tyranny." A few months later in July, a local doctor named Scott Hamblin, who had grown up around that street, wanted to show his wife and kids the area where he had spent his childhood. He took them up to the area in the mountains where he would watch thunderclouds roll in as a kid, an area that happened to be just near Bill's home. Bill hopped into his truck and rolled up to the Hamblin family as they enjoyed the sights. While Scott had never met Bill, he did know of his reputation. He told his family that it would be for the best if they drove away. Bill wasn't happy with this, though, following them a further 2 miles down the hill and into their own driveway. Scott ushered his family into their home before confronting Bill in his truck. Bill hopped out and poked Scott in the chest with his finger, telling him to stay off his street and his hill. He said that he knew Scott was there to perform surveillance on him and that he wouldn't stand for it. Scott pushed his hand away and told Bill that he didn't even know who he was. It was then that Bill pulled out a handgun and aimed it clearly at Scott's head, telling him that he should find out who he was before he came out to watch him again before leaving. Scott went inside and called the police, but he was surprised to see that the police seemed a little reluctant to take action despite what had just happened. Eventually, though, the local sheriff's department did issue another warrant for Bill's arrest, this time for aggravated assault. It seemed that now the authorities couldn't really beat around the bush any longer when it came to arresting Bill. After all, now that he was putting guns up against local residents' heads, it wasn't purely about financial crime any longer. They began to plan how exactly they would arrest a man who was armed to the teeth in a fortress on top of a hill. It would be a few more months before the police would actually come to put their plans into place. On November 5th of 2001, the Apache County Sheriff's Department made their way out to arrest Bill at his home on 2 charges, one of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon and one of endangerment. The whole operation would involve 17 officers, and it started with 2 of them disguising themselves as civilians in a pickup truck. Their plan was to more or less replicate Bill's previous incidents with people parking on his street. They would get him all riled up until he hopped into his car to chase them down. Then, when he was away from his home, they would arrest him. While he would very still likely be armed with at least 1 gun, it was far less dangerous than confronting him in his home. However, the plan immediately went south. This time, for some reason, was different. Unlike every other incident in the past, when Bill would swing his weapon around and puff out his chest, this time he wasn't quite so ready. When the police identified themselves to Bill, they didn't expect to see this portly old man turn around and full-on sprint back to his truck. With a hitch in the plan happening so soon, they weren't quite sure how to proceed. The police felt that they had no choice but to follow him back to his home, hopefully catching him before he made it back inside. Bill sped off back towards his house, barely missing one of the officers as he swerved around a roadblock that they had erected on the street. He pulled up into his yard and exited the truck, running full speed back towards the home. However, Bill didn't plan to simply go inside and lock the door. Once he got up to the front porch, he pulled out his gun and aimed it at the police. The cops pulled out their own guns in response, leading to an all-out shootout on Bill's property, exactly as they feared would happen. Bill shot one of the police officers in the head, 40-year-old Deputy Robert Martinez, sending him crumbling to the ground. The officers returned fire themselves, and that is where Bill's decision to start firing without cover would prove to be his end. One deputy, Joseph Goldsmith, returned fire. He shot towards Bill 9 times, fully emptying his gun. Once the smoke cleared, it was evident that Bill had been defeated. Bill fell to the ground, having multiple gunshot wounds to both his head and his heart. All things considered, things could have been much worse. Bill was known for keeping a loaded AK-47 right behind his front door. Robert Martinez was loaded up into an ambulance and then taken to the hospital with life-threatening injuries. By some miracle, he was able to survive being shot in the head. In the end, Bill was the only casualty that day. After Bill died, the FBI was worried that his memorial service would attract his loyal followers, armed militia members from all over the United States. A few agents attended the funeral in fears that something would happen. However, they were pleasantly surprised to see that their fears didn't play out at all. By all accounts, Bill's funeral was very sparsely attended, with only a few friends and his family showing up to pay their respects. Despite his falling out with Bill Cooper in the past, Alex Jones couldn't pass up the opportunity to get some content out of his death. He called up Bill's friend, the one that he had emailed, and said that he would never be taken alive, and asked him to appear on his show. Alex Jones was fully convinced that the feds had taken Bill out for speaking his truth. He refused to believe the idea that he had been killed over a relatively small-scale local matter. Bill's friend, who was never able to get a word in despite being called in to speak, simply hung up on him. While Bill's funeral may not have been a large event, his death did send waves throughout his community. His death only served to make him into a martyr. To a lot of people, dying in a shootout with the feds only added credibility to his stories. If anything, it was Bill's death that really cemented his legacy in UFO circles, much more than anything he had ever done in life. While a lot of people had come to doubt him, even see him as a joke within the UFO community, his death made them rethink their views. What if, they thought, he really had been telling the truth all along? After all, very few people knew about the tax evasion issues or his confrontations with his neighbors. Bill Cooper still holds a wide influence today. Even 30 years after his book, Behold a Pale Horse, was published, it still remains a staple within some circles of the UFO and militia communities. A lot of what he said in the book still applies to modern society, pulling in many new believers from the next generation as well as maintaining followers he held in life. Alex Jones got a lot of inspiration for how he conducts himself through Bill's radio show, including his cocky, boisterous attitude and his focus on controversial conspiracy theories. Although things didn't turn out too well for Alex, his shenanigans have cemented him as a household name to this very day. Bill's theories have also cemented themselves within popular fiction as well, with the best possible example of this being the X-Files, a show that needs no introduction. Many of the theories that Bill either invented or popularized make up a majority of the mythology of the series. If you thought that Bill's story sounded a bit familiar, that might be why. Everything from the idea of aliens colluding with the Illuminati to the story of the contract with the aliens that allowed them to abduct humans was adapted for the show. Even Bill's tendency to refer to aliens as EBEs was adapted for the drama, with that term being used prominently throughout. Even both the son and the father of the main character, Fox Mulder, were named William. However, Bill's remaining influence is all but jolly. His views have gone on to inspire newer, much more violent movements. One of these is the Q movement itself. The Q lore actually shares a lot of similarities with Bill's conspiracies. The very movement itself may have been inspired by Bill, at least in part in the beginning, with Bill having claimed in Behold a Pale Horse that he had been able to see the secret Navy documents due to his Q-level security clearance, something that the mysterious figure behind the Q movement claimed as well. One of the most well-known members of the Q movement is also a big fan of Bill Cooper's. That man is none other than Jake Angeli, the Q shaman himself. Mainly known for wearing a big fur hat with horns and usually sporting some sort of American flag face paint, Jake became the face of the January 6th incident. Jake said that he had spent a lot of time investigating both the Illuminati and the Bilderberg Group, saying that he felt validated upon reading about them in Bill's book. The Q shaman said that he fully believed that the government killed Bill in order to silence him, saying, "When you really do enough research, it all ties together." Once again, thank you for watching my video. If you found it interesting, please give it a like, it really helps me out in the algorithm, and feel free to subscribe if you want to see more content like this. Don't forget to check out the Zeta-files channel as well, I'm leaving a link to that down in the description below. If you want, go ahead and check out my new merch store, there you can get yourself some cool Dire Trip t-shirts and other stuff as well. If you want, go ahead and follow me on social media as well. If you need to get a hold of me, that's the easiest way, and it's probably the only way you'd ever hear about it if anything ever happened to the channel. I also really appreciate when people subscribe to my Patreon, there you can get videos early, ad-free, and uncensored. Channel memberships are up too, and you can get the same benefits there as well. Once again, this has been your host Kyle. Thank you, and good night.